You're listening to the new media. You're listening to Mitchell Talks. Learn more at MitchellTalks.com and follow me, Scott Mitchell, on Twitter at MitchellTalks. Last weekend, while I was taping Your Vote Counts, Representative Dunnington and Leader Echols, when asked about state questions, said this.
State question 800 is one that I'll be voting yes on. That's the Vision Fund. It would take a portion of the gross production tax and it would put it away for the future in order for us, as we deplete a finite resource, to be saving for our future in order to spend in down years on energy. Make sure you take a look at that one as one to vote yes on, Vision Fund.
Mr. Leader, any of the state questions stand out to you?
Well, I agree with what my colleague said also, but I would read those state questions before you go to the ballot box. If not, there's going to be a lot of reading. There are quite a few state questions. I also would agree with the Vision Fund. What the Vision Fund would do, state question 801, it would take a portion of that gross production tax, put it away. It'd help us become less energy independent in this state, less dependent on the ebbs and flows of the gross production tax.
So it got me to thinking, I wonder what the education folks say about this. So I went to Shawn, who is at the Oklahoma State School Boards Association. I asked him about State Question 800 and 801. His take on State Question 800 is definitely different than Representative Dunnington or Leader Echols.
There are two state questions that impact education significantly. One would be State Question 800, and the other would be State Question 801. 800 is definitely bad. State Question 800 would redirect dedicated funding that goes to schools and put it into a vision or state stabilization fund. Probably the biggest question mark on that is the why. I think we all agree we need rainy day funds, we need stabilization funds. We all know about the rainy day fund. Most people probably don't know that the legislature created a second rainy day type fund called the State Stabilization Fund 2 years ago, which hasn't received any revenue yet. That would start this year. So the idea of starting a third one is really a head scratcher. Along with it would take dedicated gross production revenue, which we just raised gross production to help pay for teacher salaries. So now we're going to take some of that dedicated gross production money and put it into what they're calling a vision fund, or a third rainy day type fund. Probably could guess, what would the stabilization fund, the one that they created 2 years ago, which would start this year, what kind of money would it receive? It would also receive gross production revenue as well as excess corporate income tax revenue. So it's kind of a questionable as to why they would create three and then taking away dedicated education funding at a time where I think we all agree we need to increase education funding. A big part of what they would be siphoning off is money that was raised to help with the current teacher salary increase. Well, there's some other interesting issues that are not education related with State Question 800. It would take 5% of gross production the first year, which is 2020, and then it would take an additional 0.2% moving forward until it took 100% of all gross production revenue. Once that money goes into what's called the Vision Fund, 4% of that money each year would go to the General Revenue Fund. So it's not set up to help in lean years or to accept more money in big years. We could have the worst recession ever and we would get 4% from the fund that goes to the general revenue. We could have the best year ever and we would still receive 4% of the fund going to general revenue. The questionable side of this is the money that's in the fund can be invested in the stock market by the state treasurer. All of the other state funds have a prohibition against private investments. So in theory, not in theory, in practice, the state treasurer could actually invest state dollars in Oklahoma companies, which in my mind leads to a question of conflict of interest. If you're regulating and receiving taxes from an entity, should you own a portion of that entity? The other significant piece that has people questioning the fund is it also allows for up to 5% of the fund to be used for debt for counties and cities. So they could pay for Tulsa County to have a big bond issue for a new river project, or Oklahoma County or Oklahoma City to have part of maps for Oklahoma City. I think those are some things that people statewide question. Why would the state have a fund that could be invested in city and county debt services. No, if you look deeper, it is not a rainy day type fund. It's not a fund set aside for bad times or for a savings, and you can tap it or release more money if we have a recession. The backside on the investments and this city and county bond issues are the ones that really make people question, was that the intent in the beginning of being able to invest in the private market and be able to help out municipalities and counties? There was a similar bill that went through the legislature this last year, and the governor vetoed it for some of the same issues that I'm talking about. Very vaguely written, not really a rainy day fund, no way for the legislature to tap it, and it wasn't clear. At that time, it was being touted as only taking a portion of the gross production tax that goes to the state budget and would leave the school and county money alone, which we now know is not true. It will take 5% of all gross production off the top to the Vision Fund, and then that number will grow each year by 0.2%. Our association came out against State Question 800. The Administrators Association came out against State Question 800. I've not talked to anyone in the education community that's for it, primarily because it takes away dedicated funding to schools in a time where we know our schools are underfunded. Even if you like the idea of this as a long-term stabilization fund, why would we take money today from schools that are underfunded to try to help the budget 20 years from now? Let's get schools funded to a competitive level with schools in our region, and then we can talk about, do we need another rainy day or stabilization fund or vision fund or whatever you want to call it.
Dr. Hime, the executive director of the Oklahoma State School Boards Association, is much more favorable to State Question 801 by State Senator Stepanie Bice. The State School Board Association neither endorses nor opposes State Question 801, but he did detail what is in State Question 801.
State Question 801 is a bill that Senator Bice and others ran, and I think they had great intent. The intent was to provide more flexibility for school boards to spend money how they want to spend it. What does that look like? It would allow you to spend your building fund, which is property taxes, a finite amount of property taxes that go into a fund, and you can open that up and spend it money on teacher salaries and other things. Currently, you can only spend it on building and operations needs, custodian salaries, utilities, remodeling building, roofing a building, etc. So we're neutral on this. We're not against the flexibility. The thing we're really cautioning people and making sure we want the voters to know is it does not increase revenue for schools. A lot of people think it's a vote to allow local communities to increase revenue, especially around the idea that Kevin Stitt has been talking about being able to locally compete and increase revenue. So somehow they think that's tied together, and it is not. It's, again, a very small amount of money that schools get in a building fund that all schools can already spend 2 and 3 times based on the current approvable expenditure. So we really want people to talk to their school people, talk to their board members, understand that it's not going to improve their funding. Haven't found any school leaders or board members that support it or have asked for it. We've expanded that definition over the past decade or so in statute already to where you can pay for software and band instruments and hardware for technology and all these other things. So I don't think it's going to really change what schools are doing because they already spend that money. I just don't want 6 months from now at the legislature or in public to say, well, why are schools asking for more money? Because didn't we vote for more money at the ballot box? This does not increase revenue. If you'd like to vote for it, vote your conscience. If you vote against it, that's fine as well. But make sure that we share with our friends and family that it's not going to increase revenue for schools. It just widens the ability for schools to spend money from one underfunded account to another underfunded account. Interestingly enough, Oklahoma is only one of 4 states in the nation that receives $0 from the state for capital improvement for buildings. So this building fund is all local ad valorem money. We don't receive any state money for that. And the idea here is to free that spending out of that local ad valorem money up into spending it for salaries and other things that the state does provide some money for. So what I'd like to see us come back with is the conversation about how do we raise revenue? How do we stop being one of 4 states that doesn't receive any money from the state to help equalize property tax money for buildings so that our schools have good technology, adequate facilities, etc.
The State Questions author, Senator Stepanie Bice of Oklahoma City, is urging voters to approve State Question 801 to give local districts more flexibility. She also says there's some misinformation she wants to be clear voters know about before they go to the polls.
First of all, let me be clear. State Question 801 is not a replacement for any of the funding that's going to the teacher pay raise or any other dedicated funding source. The reason I proposed State Question 801, and I think it is a good measure, is that it provides flexibility for school districts, and that's really all it is. We tend to silo dollars and restrict them for specific uses, and I'm not sure that that's in the best interest of the school districts. And by allowing these dollars to essentially be used for building and maintenance as well as any operational expenses, it provides some flexibility to districts that maybe they have a little bit of additional funding left over at the end of the school year and they want to be able to augment a science classroom, buy a STEM program for a middle school. It provides that flexibility that they really don't have with the ad valorem dollars that are restricted in this fund. There is a lot of misinformation about what 801 does. A lot of people have an assumption that 801 is bonding, and it actually has nothing to do with bonds. It has only to do with the part of your ad valorem dollars that you already pay that cannot be used for anything but building and maintenance.
The polls open at 7 a.m. I'm Scott Mitchell. Be sure and follow me on Twitter at MitchellTalks and on the MitchellTalks Facebook page. You're listening to the new media, the MitchellTalks Network. Learn more at MitchellTalks.com and follow me, Scott Mitchell, on Twitter at MitchellTalks.